My name is Pamela Hartigan. I'm delighted to see all of you here today. I wish we had time to go around the room and introduce each and every one of you. Maybe what I can simply say is raise your hands, those of you who are working in the NGO sector. So quite a few. How many of you are working in the intergovernmental sector, meaning World Bank, thank you. Public sector, meaning government. Few voices. Academic sector. Oh wow, I didn't realize there'd be so many of you here. What did I leave out? Entrepreneurial sector. A couple of entrepreneurs. Great. What I'd like to do is not, first of all, no death by PowerPoint. I hate PowerPoint. I'm not going to show you any PowerPoint slides. What I'd like to do is just give you a couple of thoughts from my experience in terms of the multiple lives that I have led in different places, and looking now at the kinds of processes that we really need to go through to achieve large-scale social change, such as the ones that we're facing around poverty, pandemics, climate change, which are all interwoven, as you know. And then I'm going to ask you to please stop me, interrupt me, put your hand up if you want anything clarifying, if you want to comment, discuss. Please do not tell us the story of your life starting from Adam and Eve. When you do, put up your hand, make the intervention short because there are so many of us and I know everybody wants to contribute. So my first observation from working in all of these sectors has been the fact that we're all, in an interesting way, trying to model our large-scale change on what we have learned from the corporate sector. In other words, when we look at the corporate sector and we think of scale, we think of having to grow to ExxonMobil-like proportions, where the corporation dominates the market. And as we know, corporates need to dominate market, need to get market share in order to be able to focus on the kind of short-term shareholder value pressures that they have. But if we're going to be tackling the issues that we're tackling, the corporate model is exactly the wrong way to go, because no massive social change has ever been actually affected using that model. If you think about the great transformations in society today, I mean, civil rights movement, the environmental movement, the women's movement, etc. These have been driven by movements of many people coming together to effect change, not because one organization grew to huge size. Yes?
Google and Facebook.
That's right, and Google and Facebook are probably, with the technology, we're seeing a very rapid change in terms of how they have actually propelled this and helped social movements. Absolutely, yes.
Planned societies.
Sorry?
Planned societies like China. Huge social movements,
Mm-hmm.
one media pop.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So there's another social movement, but it's not because one organization grew to huge proportion, but because the government has set the policy, so we have many facilitating factors. And this is another aspect when you look at what factors actually facilitate those kind of movements. They're such as, having worked a lot in the entrepreneurship world, why is it that some societies seem to have entrepreneurship in their DNA, whereas others, you can't find too many entrepreneurs, or it doesn't seem. It's not because some entrepreneurs, entrepreneurship is pretty well distributed among the population. It's just that some societies really nurture that, and other societies don't. The issue of risk-taking, the issue of, so we'll find different patterns in that way. So I started to kind of look at what it is about how we are organizing and fragmenting the way we work, and what actually prevents us from coming together. And this is just a reflection, and again, I'd love your thoughts on it. One of the things that I think is, again, coming from the corporate sector, and I'm not quite sure how we deal with this, is the importance of branding. I was in Haiti right after, in the aftermath of the earthquake. And the thing that absolutely frightened me was how many NGOs and other organizations were all coming into Haiti to try to do something, but There was very little coordinated effort among the NGOs. And much of this seemed to be, and it's not just for NGOs, it's also for the entrepreneurial sector, it's also in the multilateral sector, where in order to differentiate yourself from your competitors, even if they are working on the same issue you are, you have to actually brand yourself as being different from the other guy. And so you will find many organizations working on water, many organizations working on sanitation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But they basically, in order to drive the scarce donor dollars to where they are working, they need to show we're actually better than Water Organization .2. So how do we educate funders? And those funders are coming from foundations, they're coming from investors, they're coming from multilateral funds, et cetera. How do we educate them to realize that they need to fund the issue? The focus is not on you or your organization. The focus has to be on the issue. And that entails a completely different mindset. How do we get away from this drive towards compartmentalizing our lives, towards fragmenting what we do, and towards focusing on the individual in our egos? And it's a huge difference that we're having to affect. I mean, Lord knows that even our education systems, the way we educate our children, is very much focused on the individual. And this really, I'd love your thoughts on that, because this is one of the great challenges of our time, is how do we actually come together in convergence rather than divergence, without giving up ourselves and our individuality, but as Teilhard de Chardin says, coming together with other and becoming a person through losing our complete focus on ourselves as individuals. I think that the rules of the game in organizations are such today that we continue to see this increasing fragmentation. If you look at governments and how they operate, the layers of bureaucracy, certainly I've learned in academia, these are, in a sense, they're good because they slow down these systems and processes and they need decision and reflective decision making. But on the other hand, they challenge us in terms of working together. So those are some of the thoughts that I have. The issues of the downsides of branding, frankly, how do we deal with that? The issues of coming together as groups, coming together as issue-focused groups rather than as competing groups, fragmenting around that. And in the area of climate change, the change is so huge that we need to affect that how do we drive that sense of synergy? And just a thought looking from nature. I don't know if you have ever heard of the single-celled organism called slime mold. I've always found slime mold in looking at nature and the way nature does things is a fascinating jump-off point. Slime molds are single-celled organisms that go through nature, microscopic creatures. And when they come to, let's say one of them comes to a rotting log, and now I'm going to anthropomorphize a bit to kind of make it clear. It knows that its role in nature is to eat decaying matter. So it will eat decaying leaves, it will eat decaying logs, it will eat. And so this tiny little organism knows that there's no way that it can do this alone. And it emits in nature a pheromone. And the pheromone is a substance, a chemical substance that's recognized by other slime mold that are in that same space or around there. And that causes them to congregate, and they come together. So if you're ever walking through the forest and you see sort of this big red mass on a log that looks like dog throw up, frankly, that is an entire mass of slime mold that have come together to address what they need to do, which is eat that log. And when that log is gone, they all go back into their single-celled organism existence. And I love to compare what we need to do to slime mold. Because there's an issue to address. We can't do it as single organizations or individuals, but the power of the individual, as we know, to transform and to galvanize and to bring people together is huge. But no one person can do it alone. So in a funny way, they have to infect others with the enthusiasm and the will to do that, which is really the role oftentimes of visionary entrepreneurs. But one thing I've learned from working with entrepreneurs is most of them are great visionaries, but they cannot manage themselves out of a paper bag. And I like to think that the reason I'm working in the business school, I hate to say this to my students, but it's true. Entrepreneurs don't go to business school. So, but business school students are incredibly important to entrepreneurs because they're going to actually help them to operationalize the vision that they have. And so that match is absolutely wonderful. I also wish we had more intrapreneurs. I don't know, those of you who are working in government, tremendous responsibility for being change agents within your institutions, because it is so difficult for the change agents outside to actually make those changes if they don't have the intrapreneurs who are driving that from inside as well. So those matches are absolutely critical to drive through the kinds of policies that we need for climate change policy and proactive decision making to happen. Same thing in academia. Academia is a really interesting, place, and I'd love to exchange some ideas with colleagues that are in the academic institutions. One of the things I think too is the misaligned incentives. I find it really interesting that the incentives within academia are to publish in esoteric journals that nobody will ever read except peers. And so I had a really interesting experience last year when I was organizing the Skoll World Forum, where Jeff Skoll, who endowed the institution that I run, or the center that I run, had just made an incredible documentary on oceans. And as you know, Jeff also started Participant Productions that has had, he was the one who produced Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth related to this, etc. So he had just produced a documentary on oceans. And we were going to have a session at the Skoll World Forum on oceans. And I thought, this is fantastic. We have an institute at Oxford that only focuses on oceans. And let's showcase Oxford's knowledge by getting some of these academics to come to a panel on this discussion. So I called up the center there, and I had talked with a couple of the academics, really wonderfully, sweet, lovely people. Oh no, we can't participate. But wait a minute, you guys are, you really are supposed to know about oceans. Well, actually, yes, but I personally am focused on studying oceans 15,000 meters below the sea, and looking at a specific kind of molecule that works there. So I can't really talk about the big picture. So the issue is that we're being forced in academia to focus more and more on tiny little pockets, because that's how we are able to publish and to be respected by our peers. So we need to change some of those incentives. As you can see, every institution, every sector needs to drive a massive change. How we're going to get there? It's up to all of us. It's up to all of us. And now I'd love to hear some of your experiences and thoughts. Yeah.
I really like your slime mold analogy. And it brings to mind something that, are you from California by any chance?
I'm actually from Ecuador. Who here is from Latin America? Ah, no te creo. Bueno, después hablamos.
You sound kind of Californian.
I do sound like a Yank. My parents believed that we should learn English from an early age, and of course, being in Latin America, we had Americans teaching us English. Hence.
Okay, muy bien. So the thought is, an analogy with the slime mold idea is that I don't think we can get rid of branding, but what we can do is we can do something which I think of as a policy swarm. Let's take the example of California, which is pretty close to the tipping point in terms of moving into the renewable energy future.
Oh, I'd love to believe that.
It probably just needs another couple of keystone policies, enabling policies to be adopted by the government to make the transition go really quickly. It's like an avalanche ready to release, and there are a few other jurisdictions around like that. And I think one of the things that we can do together is we can look for opportunities where the avalanche is ready to release and just needs a bit of a shove, and we all pile on at the same time. Kind of like a vase encourages. We get in touch with each other and say, what can we all do now in the next 6 months to put every resource we can into the game of pushing California over the top on this specific issue. And let's just get that done, because we know that once that happens, it'll be a precedent which will make it easier.
Yeah.
You know, it's like reducing the potential energy, the hump that you have to get through in other jurisdictions, because now you've got a working example. So one of the smart things we can do, instead of working through these fragmented little lives, which we focus on our own little
Right.
thing, we never have enough togetherness to really push anything over the hump, is from time to time, do a policy swarm.
Sure, very much like the election of Barack Obama or overthrowing Hosni Mubarak, or exactly, which is great. Yes?
I'm going to be a contrarian. I
Great.
think that the slime mold example works great for instant gratification.
Mm-hmm.
So slime mold sees a food source, come on guys, there's lots of food, and everyone's instantly gratified. It doesn't work for climate change, where the payoffs are going to be 2 or 3 generations in the future.
Absolutely.
So a slime mold that's got the prescience to think, you know, if you come here now, in 3 generations, guys, we might have food.
Good point.
Much less likely to happen, I think.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. And I was thinking more of the slime mold comparison in terms of the difference between individual action and group action. But this is the great challenge of climate change, is the exact thing that you pinpoint, because of the fact that it is so long-term, and we have Sesame Street minute or New York minute or London minute ways of time frame. I mean, we, as you say, we want to see it now. And one of the challenges there really is that these, again, it's a challenge for funders and for investors. Cure AIDS in 2 years, you know, or we'll pull your funding. And these things take a very long time. So where is the patient capital out there to actually support this kind of change that has to happen? And having worked a lot with investors, no matter how much they understand that here, they don't get it here. And they act in very bizarre and conflicting ways. I'll never forget when I was working at WHO on the tobacco-free initiative. And it just goes to show you the schizophrenia of this stuff. We had a major, huge donor that you would recognize immediately, a foundation. It was not the Skoll Foundation. Come to us and say, we love what you're doing. We love the tobacco-free initiative, which was about getting governments to change their policies on tobacco production. And we really want to support that. And so we were really excited. They wanted to commit several $1 million, which was a big amount of money for our initiative at that time, or at any time, actually. And we started to do our homework. And we realized that the capital of that foundation, much of it was invested in British American tobacco. What would you do? So they're offering a big fat donation that's going to really help your anti-tobacco campaign. And meanwhile, they're investing in that. Did we take the money? British American Tobacco, sorry. Not 3-letter acronyms. What would you have done? Because we're faced with these kinds of issues every day. Anybody? Take the money? Take the money? Will we take the money?
You couldn't.
There was no way we could take that money. There was no way. We would have been totally compromised. And we were so ticked off about not being able. We asked them, can you divest your tobacco stocks? You know, you would have asked them to sell their grandmother down the river or something, you know. It was impossible for them to not understand the schizophrenia of that space. And again, this fragmentation, how we compartmentalize our lives, is just one of the biggest challenges that we face. This is where I make my money, and this is where I do good. What kind of screw up is that? So we're facing with all of these, again, fragmentation, etc. So those are some of the thoughts. Yes?
You're talking a lot about interdisciplinarity, and I think that's a big point of climate change because it's so systemic. From an academic standpoint, I think before we start doing interdisciplinary research, we need to do research on interdisciplinarity. And it seems a given that you just have to get scientists together in a room and they'll come up with something brilliant, but we really don't know how to produce that kind of knowledge.
Right.
And we need to study how to study together. There's an intermediate step that I think we need
It's
to
listening
right.
to the practitioner,
Yeah.
too. Because the practitioner has to say, these are the research questions that we really need answers to. And I think that that's one of the roles that we're trying to play here at Oxford is getting, because academics will pursue what they think they want to pursue, or, you know, I mean, what will get them published. So the other thing that I noticed too is, and this is very much the case at Oxford, I was really quite surprised because I also teach at Columbia Business School, is that, you know, Saïd Business School's only been around for 15 years. And apparently, its creation raised a huge debate here at Oxford. Because I remember an Oxford alum telling me, he's about 75 years old, that when he came to Oxford, he was told, forget about learning anything practical here. You are not going to learn anything practical. You're going to learn to think, you're going to learn to philosophize. Hence, you know, the tremendous emphasis on the classics and the tremendous emphasis on, you know, what the tutorials and sort of philosophy and science, etc. But business, like journalism, was seen as a trade. It is not an intellectual pursuit. It is not a field. You do not, for example, if you need to go to a, you know, if you have a health problem, you go to a doctor who has a license. If you have, you know, a legal problem, you go to a lawyer who's been through law school. But anybody can open a business. You don't need, you know, an MBA to open a business. So there's this debate about, is business a trade or is it a discipline? Is it a field? And it's very interesting to see how tough it was to get Saïd Business School established here at Oxford. And then the second thing is, because it is under the Oxford umbrella, there's a separation almost between the faculty and the theoretician, I mean the people who are business theoreticians or the academics, and the practitioners. And that space really needs to be bridged, especially in the business world. And how we get that going is a great challenge. Any other thoughts? Yes?
I would like to go back to the point that you said in the beginning, that we shouldn't ask the help of the corporates, or we are misinterpreting, we are misinterpreting their role in this.
Yeah.
Good, let's discuss it. Maybe I got it wrong. But one of the key things I would like to bring to the room is the consumption thing, because this is one of the big problems that are causing climate change.
Sure.
And they are a core part
of
the solution. The second is that brilliant minds nowadays all wish to work for the private sector, and we need these brilliant minds with climate change. We need to bring them to our side of the fence, or whatever side of the fence, but we need them to work with us. And the second is that two important things related to things you have been talking, which is communications, which is my area, and the values we share nowadays. They're each day being more run by the corporate way of mindset. You know, you brought Google to the discussion of Twitter and so on. And although it is producing some revolutions, some important revolutions, it's also being very quickly used by companies and corporations to feed in whatever the brands or and values also. I think China, it's a great example of how the West and so bringing these topics, I'd like to hear some thoughts of you.
I think I find what many of the enlightened companies are doing to be absolutely phenomenal. Talking about large-scale social change. Last week we had the Skoll World Forum. We had 850 participants. It was just absolutely massive. And one of the things that was really interesting in one of the sessions was a session called Corporates Driving Large-Scale Corporate Change, Large-Scale Change. And this was very different organizations. One was Novartis, one was Cisco, and one was, I'm trying to think of Danone. And the idea is how they were incorporating into the DNA of their operations these kinds of initiatives, not around climate change, although some are beginning to do this with looking at their supply chains and, you know, sustainability, etc. But there's still too few of them. Getting to the talent and where students want to go, that is where the change is going to come from. I don't completely agree that all students want to go and work in the private sector. On the contrary, one of the things that has brought me here, and which astounds me, is how much young people are all eager to work with organizations that are philosophically positive, morally compelling, and fundamentally innovative. And they're not going to go into they don't want to wait till they're 50 to give back. They want to start now to integrate their passions with their discipline. So they don't want to bifurcate again. I have tremendous hopes in this current generation. Yes.
I think my perspective as an academic is universities or institutions of higher learning are kind of ossified.
Completely.
And they are not they're not consistent with the realities outside the university
right.
walls. I think huge phenomena like climate change ought to affect how we teach.
That's right.
And I think atomization of knowledge is essentially an artifact of academia. It is not how reality out there is constructed. And so we're now trying to sort of go at these problems with things like interdisciplinarity. But the world doesn't work like that. The world is essentially integrated. So I think an essential step sort of in academia is sort of to figure out how to get out of this fest of incest.
Exactly.
That peers read each other's papers and kind of fall in love with each other all the time.
That's right.
And sort of move towards a broad framework for how we structure undergraduate education. This sort of begins from an undisciplined sort of education process that hopefully sort of integrates and immerses students in a broad knowledge base, philosophy, psychology, environment, sociology, politics, before they move on to the other things that they might do, because that's how the world works.
I imagine that you all have seen Sir Ken Robinson's TED Talks on this, how schools kill creativity, which are absolutely brilliant. When I first came to Oxford, I remember the first week I was here, somebody said, "Oh, have you heard the Oxford joke?" And I was like, "No." And it was like, "How many Oxford dons does it take to change a light bulb?" And the response was, "Change?" So it's not quite that bad. I'm going to call yes.
Just like going back to the slime mold.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things maybe about the slime mold is that it knows what it wants to do. It's maybe got like one value, which is to like eat decomposing stuff.
Yes.
And I think one of the big challenges about big social change is we don't really have very open, profound discussions about what kind of society we even want. It's like the discussion has been reduced to kind of like trading off between things we think we're allowed to have.
Yeah.
We don't really talk from the heart about what we really value.
Yeah,
So
it's almost like a
really
zero-sum game. You can have this and you can't have that, when in fact it's not.
So for us, I think the pheromone for people is like kind of really talking from the heart about what we value.
That's right.
And then people crowd around that.
You can take the slime mold analogy just so far, and then it kind of starts to fall apart. Yes, in the back.
Just to say that on the point that you raised, there actually is a very good piece of work that was done by Columbia University, the Commission on Education for Sustainable Development, that talked about the fact that to deal with sustainability and change, what you need is generalists and not just specialists. The specialists are fine, but you need somebody who can actually understand enough of the specialities and bring it together to respond. But my point really is the fact that for each of these examples, there is work out there that says this. The problem for me is responding to your question, which is, why does it never float above and actually do things? Why does it never move beyond a brilliant idea? Why does it never get to scale? And somebody says, okay, let's run with that. I mean, so this report is there. It was brilliant. It was very well designed. MacArthur took it up and is actually running a set of courses. But the issue is that MacArthur can only do so much.
That's right.
So while they're doing this and they're creating these interdisciplinary programs, we're making policies that are doing the exact opposite probably of what needs to be done. And that for me is that debate about how do we actually get enough movement to actually begin to change things while we're learning about the other things to be done.
I think in a funny way, it's almost what we were talking about in terms of short-termism versus long-term. I think it was one of you that said, we want our cake now, and we don't want to wait. And how do we teach our children? Have you all seen, again, that marshmallow experiment that was done with the little kids, which was amazing, where they put children in a room and it was, what was it? They had the children, one child at a time, and the children were like 3 years old, and they said, we're going to put a marshmallow here. We're going to leave you alone for a few minutes. We have to run out. It was one kid at a time. And if you don't eat the marshmallow, when we come back, we will give you 2 marshmallows. And it filmed the children with their struggle over whether they should eat the marshmallow or not eat the marshmallow. And they were saying how interesting this experiment followed these children as a longitudinal experiment and found out where were they at 18 or 20 years old, those that ate the marshmallow and those that didn't eat the marshmallow. And it was really fascinating to see the outcomes. In other words, they had been able to delay gratification, and in fact, they were successful in quite a few areas of life that we would like to see. But there was one little girl, I remember in this, it was a TED video, who had not eaten the marshmallow, but she had been smelling it. She had been actually hyperventilating on this marshmallow. And when the guy came back, it turned out she had eaten the inside of the marshmallow and left the outside. So he was like, we can trust her, but we have to watch her. You know? So it was a very interesting, you should see it on TED, yes.
I think an important lesson from that is that if we know which are the signs that tell us who is likely or what organizations are likely to innovate to lead to some kind of change, how can we think about investing in that? I work with the Red Cross, but I'm a researcher. We have been investing with Columbia University to recruit those advanced students who have still that fire in the belly to transform the planet and give them a chance to align their academic requirements, a thesis, an internship, a coursework, with things that a humanitarian sector needs to do, but we don't have the brain power, the skills, or the time. And it's been fantastic. We've been recruiting like crazy. These kids are now either working with humanitarians or in governments or in private sector or with the White House, and they open doors, and they themselves report being happier than the kid who doesn't get nurtured that fire.
They're my great hope. The only problem there that I see is that I have so many students that want to go into, you know, social ventures or the NGO sector, but they come out of these degree programs with these huge debts. And they're like, we need to pay this off before we can go do what we really want to do. So that's a real tension there between how do I go in and start my venture with, you know, how do I, you know, let me just get to the lady in the back who's had her hand up right.
Yeah, just remember the SMEs. In the UK, SMEs are actually 90% of the corporate world. It's not the big corporates that are pushing Britain, it's SMEs.
Small and medium
enterprises. Yeah. But the issue is that policy is really constraining these small companies to thrive, particularly in the recession that's going on now. And actually, innovation quite often comes from the smaller groups.
That's
not the
exactly
bigger groups.
right. That's exactly right. No, don't get me talking about the UK policies. Who had something that said I want to wrap it up?
Very briefly.
Yeah.
I think that the Saudi Business School could use a green finance program, because ultimately business will do the right thing if it pays and only if it pays. So we need the right kind of green financial mechanisms. And I actually really tried, I work at the university, I tried to get people interested in a green finance program.
Great, we need to talk.
Yeah.
Great. Closing. Yes, I've been told I have to give you guys.
Yes.
Ah, que gusto.
Yes, I have a question about your experience that is very connected to your experience, because you said that we need to change the focus on the branding to the issue, and also on the individual and the hero archetype to a more collective leadership. So, but the field of social entrepreneurship is still very focused.
I completely agree.
Even the Skoll Foundation.
And I'm partly to blame.
Through a change, but it's still the individual, the hero. So how can you change it?
Actually, we are moving away from that. This year, the whole highlight of the Skoll World Forum was ecosystem growth, and trying, balancing. You need the individual. If we take the case, for example, of Muhammad Yunus or Rodrigo Baggio or any one of these, they inspire people with their vision, but that's not enough. And I think that, I almost like to say that the entrepreneur is like a virus. He injects other people with that virus, and they all, have the disease of wanting to. But how do you actually? And oftentimes we create a monster out of that individual. So I am fully with you. I think it's a balance. And of course, like anything, oftentimes we start with an imbalance before we get to the balance. But I'm completely in agreement with you. And I know that we have to stop. I have to stop.
Thank you. Can we just, after listening to Pamela and what we have shared, take 30 seconds to think about, what does this mean for me? join me in thanking Pamela for
Thank you.